I'm Amit. I'm the head of architecture for gov.uk One Login. I'm here with my engineering colleagues, Hugh and Toby. And it's a really great privilege to speak with you on behalf of the kind of hundreds of people who've worked on gov.uk One Login, including my predecessor, Pete Chamberlain, who's just here in the front. So gov.uk One Login's mission is to move from the kind of position that I think we're all sort of been familiar with, of interacting with government services using a kind of plethora of different logins, different passwords to remember. Some of the logins that you have might have some sort of identity proving kind of associated with it. You might have to provide your passport, others don't. To where we want to be. A single login, single password, or hopefully more kind of modern passwordless credentials to keep hold of, to get you into all of your interactions with government. And in terms of the benefits of this, we are replacing legacy systems, so all of those existing login systems. Also, having the identity available means we can eliminate a lot of the back office work that goes on, where you don't have identity. You have to do other work to try and make sure that you're dealing with the right person and that you're not about to give a refund to do a fraudster. So we're making things cheaper for the taxpayer through reducing that duplication, also through reducing fraud by having that kind of single route in. We have more kind of frequent interaction with the user. It's easier to detect if there's some sort of account takeover going on, and intervene, stop that fraud happening. And we're baking in inclusion. So rather than just having sort of one way of proving identity, there are several different ways. You can use a combination of evidence that will work for you. And as a modern system, we are sort of building it in a secure and privacy-conscious way. So how we're doing? We've created 2.5 million accounts. This is from last month, I think. 2.5 million accounts, 5.7 million identities. And we've built a mobile app, and we've had 7.8 million downloads of the app, and we've onboarded 40 services so far. Might actually have one or two more because, as I say, this is from last month. Now, kind of want to show you kind of what we built. So thinking about value streams, I think about kind of the login element, the single sign-on element. So we built an OpenID Connect, standards compliant single sign-on system, and then we've got kind of an account repository behind that. And we are sort of taking a lot of care with that data, trying to shard it, trying to make sure that we are protecting it as much as possible. Moving on to the kind of the identity proving element of the system. So as I say, we've got all these kind of different ways of proving identity. We've got different checks that we can do. And we are using the W3C verifiable credential standard. So what we'll do when we do some sort of check, say we check your passport, we create a verifiable credential representing that check. Verifiable credential is a signed piece of JSON. So we'll keep hold of that, and we can use that now to build it as part of a kind of range of evidence to prove the identity, and we can also keep hold of that and use it in the future. The other kind of relevant standard for identity is something we call GPG 45. What that is a standard that sets out a kind of defined level of confidence in identity. We currently, our connected parties are currently using a level we call medium. And there are a few different ways to build up a kind of package of evidence to reach that level. So our identity system has to kind of send you on a journey to assemble that evidence, and then you make sure that you've kind of got the right combination of things so that we can say you've reached median. And we'll store the record of those checks so that we can use them in the future. And then we also use verifiable credentials on the other end. We present a verifiable credential to the service you're trying to use. So, say you're trying to do your tax, we'll present that to HMRC. And that's the thing that they trust. And what we get is this lovely chain of trust. At the point that you're doing your transaction, that the trust in your identity can be traced all the way back to those different checks that have been done, which gives us confidence in what's happening. So that's the identity subsystem. Lots of these different checks, including the mobile app, which supports some of those checks. The third part here is the fraud prevention and detection. So we have integrated a fraud risk engine, so we can look at the pattern, the session that you've got, the things that you're doing, and try and make sure that it is you, not a fraudster. And we've also sort of integrated some third-party services into that. So underpinning these kind of three value streams that are kind of providing value to the user and to the connected services, we have kind of the stuff that we need to make the ship work. It's the support stuff. We've built out a contact center, our operations, our live operations, so we're kind of monitoring the system, monitoring performance, and so on. And then our integration, so the facilities to connect the services to one login. Obviously, we've got a lot of services to connect, so it needs to be sort of quick and easy to get it done, and obviously kind of leveraging the standards to help with that. And I've got this last thing about this kind of this trust. There are two ways in which I think trust kind of runs through the whole system. One is that kind of end-to-end trust that I was describing, the verifiable credentials, where we're kind of using cryptography to assure ourselves of the checks that have been done and kind of keep that knowledge over time that you can't kind of tamper with those checks over time. But the second and perhaps more important one is that for this whole thing to work, people have to trust their interaction with government. They have to trust that they're giving us their data. We have to do the right things with that data. We have to look after that data, keep it safe from cyber criminals, and so we've kind of built out the system in a very privacy conscious way, and yeah. So last thing I could kind of mention about this is because of all those crypto operations, we are actually making really heavy use of KMS. It's quite some big numbers when we look at our infrastructure. Okay, so serverless. So we chose serverless. We started about 3 years ago. GDS, a little surprisingly, didn't have a standard kind of internal hosting platform. So we had some freedom to choose the technology we wanted to use. We chose serverless, and there are probably, I think that a lot has gone very well with that. I think in terms of scalability, thinking about like the peaks that we have to deal with. I talked about self-assessment. We're going to have to kind of deal with the self-assessment peak. The mobile app has already had to deal with some aspects of the self-assessment peak, because the mobile app also supports, is also kind of, in addition to supporting one login, it's also supporting some of the existing functionality in HMRC. And also kind of the Martin Lewis effect. So Martin Lewis goes on and talks about pensions, and everybody's jumps on to go and check the state pension or whatever. So we get some very big spikes. And broadly, scalability in that aspect's working for us. We also kind of have a couple of other dimensions of scalability, kind of thinking about the number of different ID proving methods. So we've kind of spun up different components to deal with that and kind of integrated that with our infrastructure. And also the number of people and teams we've had working on the project. We went through a really kind of big build phase where we had hundreds of people working on the system at once, and through the serverless architecture that we sort of developed, we were able to have that large group of people working on the system without treading on each other's toes, without creating outages. So that's gone quite well. Cost efficiency has also gone pretty well, with give or take 1 or 2 ring pulls, especially around kind of network infrastructure. We haven't quite kind of network architecture. We haven't quite got everything to the level we want to there yet, but broadly we are getting that kind of scale to zero effect, and that's going well for us. And then third area is security architecture and operations. Has also, we've really been able to. That's been working well. We've had taken advantage of the ephemeral infrastructure, the granular access controls, the good visibility we get of what's happening across the system. It's gone well. The one area where the jury's still out is this promise of being able to focus our engineering effort on the bit of the system that delivers value to users. That's one of the things we were hoping to get, and I'm not quite sure because of this lot. So we've actually we've had to spend quite a lot of engineering effort working out how to do all of this. There's loads of great building blocks. There's lots of kind of bits and pieces that we can use that are, but it's the overall kind of patterns and playbooks. Some of the stuff Tom was talking about earlier, that kind of thing, the governance and so on. It would be great if, as a community, we could sort of figure out more like sane defaults that we could apply to some of these areas. Okay, that's me. So I've given you a bit of an intro to OneLogin and this mission, and I'm going to hand over to Hugh.
Hello, hi, I'm Hugh DeProse. So I'm a lead developer at the Government Digital Service. Oh, a clicker, thank you. We're about 2-3 years into this transition. GDS didn't have any serverless before we started out, and I wanted to offer a few reflections on what our developers think about it today, and I think what that process of transitioning into serverless has really been like for people working at OneLogin. And I think the kind of core reflection I have for you is that I feel like serverless has pushed our boundaries on a number of areas. And I think that manifests in kind of 3 major ways I can think of. I think it's pushed the boundaries of what we're asking our developers to do in comparison to what they were maybe doing before, what we're asking for when we hire. I think it's pushed some of our ways of working, some quite comfortable practices that we'd fallen into across the last decade of GDS work. And I think it's also pushed on the boundaries of responsibilities. When I was kind of reflecting on why is this the case? This is just a technology. We use many things at GDS. I think for me what it comes down to is there's been a dominant paradigm, at least at GDS. I was going to say I'm sure for many of you, but I realize you're at a serverless conference. And that's been containerization across the last decade. And containers have always had that wonderful isolation where you have this nice boundary at the edge whereby you can care about what's going on in your app stack within, and sort of then you've got this nice portable bit that you can move around outside. I may be slightly ashamed to say at a conference like this, when I was a Rails developer working in containers on gov.uk, I really focused majority on what was going on in my application stack, and I kind of had some people for the infrastructure bit. And I think that's not the case now. All of our developers need to have a degree of fluency with AWS in much more depth than previously. Whereas previously our applications were built out of frameworks like Rails, and that AWS is fundamentally the framework we're operating with now. So I think the first kind of transition shift, the first boundary I think we've had pushed up against is that we're just having to ask a lot more of our developers around those kind of SRE-related skills. And I think ensuring that we build the time in for those to kind of build out. Another key theme is some of our working patterns. So we believe in shifting left at GDS. We believe in getting that really fast feedback about, is what you're building working? I think serverless has been a bit of a challenge to that. Now AWS is the frameworks, it's been difficult to get that fast feedback in a representable environment in your local machine. We're very used to being able to kind of spin up our applications either in containers or running natively on the CLI. We have tried local stack. We have tried many other approaches. Hopefully some of you can tell me about smart things that you've been up to afterwards. But I think what we've decided is there's just no substitute for having a good AWS dev environment and pushing things up there. It lengthens that time by adding a deploy step in there. And I think it's been a bit of a break with the kind of practices we used about how we do the kind of feedback loops around dev. And I think the final point is this idea of responsibilities and distribution of responsibilities between teams. I think I've come away thinking that a deep understanding of serverless and its implications needs to go well beyond your core technologists, well beyond your architects and your devs. We have people that are working on capacity questions, design of service level agreements, security, quality, product. I think there are implications for all of these groups around serverless and sort of how we use it. I think we need to kind of spread that knowledge out. I think compared to older paradigms, I think there are also slightly more opportunities for people outside of my application boundary to set and enforce rules, maybe meddle a bit in my application and how it's designed. I think back to some of the Robert C. Martin books about clean code, where it describes like your developers rallying around to discuss their linting rules, and it all sounds very sweet and something you can do in 5 minutes. Like, I think now AWS is your application. There's lots more opportunities for governance and enforcement to act on that layer. I think it's a good thing, but I think there's a question of if you want to deploy, let's say, a Lambda that says it won't deploy unless you've got a dead letter queue associated. Who writes that rule? Who's responsible for maintaining it? Who do they inform before they switch it on? How do you have those conversations across team boundaries? So I think it sort of causes us to rethink our governance structure a bit, and maybe links back a bit to some of the things Tom was saying at the start around get your governance right for that kind of fast innovation. So it has pushed us, but I think it's a good push. Like, I think it's maybe taken us a bit out of our comfort zone. I think there are virtues to all of the things I've described. If you do this right, I think you're going to come out with developers with a much broader skill set who can't just be uber specialists in your particular language. I think having a good understanding of your cloud platform in 2024 is no bad thing for any of us in our careers and also our organizations. I think we've decided that good representative dev environments that look a lot more like your production environment and maybe are provisioned by infrastructure as code that looks uncannily similar is no bad thing. And I think it's yet another cause, as all large organizations face, to think really carefully about that governance, that decision-making, that team boundary thing. There's a lot of talk right now at our organization about things like team topologies, which I don't know if any of you have come across, but thinking about your enabling teams, your experts who are going to support your teams doing this, thinking about your individual streamline teams who are delivering that value, and thinking about your platform teams who can take out entire chunks of what you do and run it as a service. I think one of the areas where we have done pretty well with that is that we've got a really great platform team who have managed to take out that entire route to production as something that my devs don't need to worry about anymore. Toby is here to tell us a little bit more about it as tech lead on that team.
Thank you. Thanks, Hugh. Just make sure this works. Yeah, I'm the tech lead for the dev platform team at OneLogin, and we support some software for the program, including the secure pipeline. We moved from deploying via Concourse to deploying directly into AWS from GitHub. That's because it makes it easier for us to verify the provenance of the code we're running and reduces our security footprint. We use a collection of GitHub actions and CloudFormation templates, and they deploy signed Lambdas via code pipelines using the AWS SAM CLI. And we're also running containers in ECS using Fargate to host our front-end node applications. So we have a pipeline which supports Lambda functions and step functions using AWS SAM and containers in ECR running on Fargate in ECS. So we have more to support than a traditional platform team, I think, and the list keeps growing because more things are being released. So you can end up with a complex and hard to maintain sort of sprawling infrastructure that tries to do all of the things, and we want to avoid that. So we have some strategies in place, like preferring convention over configuration, and we use the same pipeline for basically everything. There is some legacy stuff, but even though we're only 3 years old, I think it's kind of inevitable. We review our documentation pretty often, and we onboard our junior SREs in our platform team before they go off to the rest of the program, so that they understand the pipeline and our products before they have to implement them. We've also developed several sample, like example applications that we use as references in our documentation, and that our teams can use for onboarding their new developers who are looking for serverless patterns to follow. We reuse these same apps for integrated testing. So we do try to shift left, as Hugh mentioned earlier, and we encourage as much testing up front before teams merge their work into main, because that's our path to production. And if you block the path to production, then that's an incident in our definition. So we give teams support with running pre-commit checks, and I'd like us to have a way of verifying that pre-commit has run locally when they raise a PR. We haven't quite got there yet. We are doing integrated tests as part of pre-merge checks, and that's something we're looking to extend, especially for those teams who don't have very mature developer platforms. So some teams are on a single environment and they time share, and it's quite tempting for those teams to sort of merge work into their main branch before they've had a chance to check it in development. But if the pre-merge check is going to be deploying that code and running an integrated test on it, then it's less of a worry and it speeds up the development process. So that's a positive thing. Our approach to that is to reuse the same GitHub action and pipeline that we're using for deploying out to production to deploying that pre-merge check, and then we have another GitHub action that polls into AWS to wait for that stack to finish updating, and a third GitHub action which will run the integrated test itself. And it can do something like, for example, push a message onto an SQS queue and then check a DynamoDB table to make sure that the result has been written. And that's quite basic, but a development team can build that up into a more sort of thorough smoke test of their application. So our platform has been called a bit of a bag of bits, which teams have to implement if they have need of it. And this was meant as a criticism, but I actually quite like it as a approach to doing a platform. It does mean that teams need to understand the way their code's migrated to production, which does mean a learning curve, but knowledge of what's happening in their own accounts. So we support them and enable them to innovate and encourage a golden path, but we don't insist on a sort of one-size-fits-all solution. Some of those pieces are the secure pipeline itself, and that's the actual code pipeline job and the associated sort of policies and code build projects and S3 logging buckets and everything else. We have a GitHub action that I mentioned earlier that's called the Dev Platform Upload action. That's public if you want to have a look at that. We have a thing called a container verifier, and that spins up in an account to verify the signature on all the containers running in that account. We did have a time that we had 2 of them running in the same account, and they started trying to sort of verify each other. I won't go into detail, but yeah, it was an interesting couple of days. We have a Lambda audit CloudFormation hook that ensures the Lambda artifacts themselves have the metadata that enables us to attest their provenance, and lots of other bits and pieces. So this is called The Treachery of Images, which I thought was quite apt for a serverless conference. The artist René Magritte said, "The famous pipe, how people reproached me for it, and yet could you stuff my pipe? No, it's just a representation, is it not? So if I had written on my picture, this is a pipe, I'd have been lying. And to sort of torture that pipe metaphor a bit more, a pipeline's not the application. It should try and get out of the way as much as possible. It's not always easy. So Conway's law is that an organization's communication structure is going to dictate the architecture of the software it builds. So the pipeline that you use for deploying your application can unintentionally influence the way that you design that software. That's it from me. Thank you for listening. And I'm going to hand back to my colleague Amrit for some final thoughts.
So we've talked about OneLogin, its mission, our experience finding our way working with serverless, the developer experience, and some of the work we've done on platforms. I mean, it's been clear to me that what we're doing here with digital identity, it's kind of just the beginning. It's the foundation for a much more kind of joined up experience using government services. So there's a lot of work going on across GDS, across our organization on some of those kind of future direction. If you or anyone you know would like to take the opportunity to join us on our mission, we are about to advertise roles for devs and SREs across our locations in Bristol, Manchester, and London. Thank you.